It's no secret that MMA is the most brutal combat sport on the planet. Not many athletes in other sports see broken noses, shattered bones, gushing blood, and unconscious opponents. In MMA, this is not only routine, it's evidence of success. Fans queue up all around the globe to witness the carnage fighters unleash on each other at every event. During the 20-plus year history of the UFC and the hundreds of fights they've promoted, a few fights stand out among the rest as the most vicious and gruesome examples of the sport's brutal nature. So from outmatched, straight-up massacres to hard-hitting 5-round wars, these are the most brutal fights in UFC history. To kick off our list, we're taking you back to 2018 for UFC 231 and a featherweight title bout between Max Holloway and Brian Ortega. Despite Max being the featherweight champion and Ortega the challenger, Brian was favored to win the fight. The young American martial artist was stepping into the cage with a record of 14 wins and 0 losses. But Holloway soon put an end to that winning streak. Max put on a masterclass in striking, using his jab to keep his distance from Ortega, who's famous for his grappling and his submissions, slowly picking apart Brian's face until he was swollen, bruised, and bloody. Though he fought through the pain, Brian couldn't manage to pull off the signature submissions he was looking for. To add insult to injury, Max was so confident in winning that he gave Ortega a short lesson on blocking punches midway through the fight. Jeez, that's gotta be humiliating. Eventually, Brian succumbed to Max's superior striking in round 4 of the fight. His face was so swollen and battered that it was hard to recognize him. Following this brutal TKO, Brian took a 2-year hiatus and returned a greatly improved striker, winning a unanimous decision against Chan Sung Jun, aka the Korean Zombie. Holloway's surgical taking apart of Ortega earned him a bonus for Performance of the Night, as well as Fight of the Night. It's easy to see why this fight is thought to be one of the most brutal in the history of the sport.
Nearly 252% clip. Ortega retreat.
While this next fight didn't end in a KO, or even TKO like the last, it makes our list for the sheer warfare it showcased. Kelvin Gastelum and Israel Adesanya met at UFC 236 in 2019. There was no telling who'd walk away with the interim middleweight belt. Though considerably shorter than his opponent, Kelvin gave the future middleweight champion the hardest fight of his career. The 5-round fight was a swinging pendulum of vicious striking. The smaller Kelvin managed to close the distance and land devastating shots that wobbled his opponent, while Adesanya, a former kickboxing champion, used his skillful counter-striking. While facing off for the 5th round, both fighters were bloody and swollen. Adesanya can be seen saying out loud, "I'm preparing to die."
To beat me, I'm prepared to die. And I meant that, man. I swear to God on my life, I meant that.
Man, that's crazy. The 5th round ended with a bloodied Kelvin on the ground, and Israel walked away with the interim title via decision. However, in the eyes of fans, both fighters won that night. Their brutal performance will go down in history as one of the best in the sport. Unfortunately, it's hard to feel the same way about the fight between Valentina Shevchenko and Priscilla Cachoeira. Just as Kev and Israel were evenly matched, Valentina and Priscilla were equally unmatched. This led to one of the most hard-to-watch beatdowns the UFC has ever seen. At UFC Fight Night 125, the two faced off, fighting in the newly created women's flyweight division. The inexperienced Priscilla was making her UFC debut, while Shevchenko, a veteran of the bantamweight division and came close to winning the title, was looking to add another brutal win to her highlight reel. The fight went down how most seasoned UFC fans expected. Valentina came out guns blazing, elbowing her opponent, and subjected her to a vicious beatdown that many felt could have been stopped in the 1st round. Despite taking serious damage and being bloodied and bruised, Priscilla managed to make it to the end of the round. She came back for more in the 2nd, and that's exactly what she got. Valentina went to work on her again and finally submitted her in the 2nd round via rear naked choke. The ferocious beatdown Shevchenko put on Priscilla was absolutely brutal, and it's hard to watch. Mario Yamasaki, the referee, came under fire for not stopping the fight earlier. Even the head of the UFC, Dana White, expressed his disapproval. And get this, Cachoeira was outstruck by Valentina, 95-1. If that isn't a brutal beatdown, I don't know what is. While Priscilla and Valentina may have been poorly matched, you can't say the same of Francis Ngannou and Alistair Overeem, fought at UFC 218 back in 2017. While it's true that Ngannou had knocked out all 5 of his previous opponents, he only joined the UFC in 2015, while his opponent Alistair was a heavyweight veteran since signing with the UFC back in 2011. With wins against the likes of Mark Hunt and Frank Mir, Overeem was a force to be reckoned with, and the most well-known name that Francis had faced up to that date. The two heavyweight titans were sure to make sparks fly when they finally clashed in the ring. And boy, what a clash it was. Ngannou's name exploded onto the world stage after he brutally knocked Alistair out with a vicious uppercut in the first round of their fight. Overeem's body literally snapped backward before he landed unconscious on the octagon floor. If that wasn't brutal enough, Francis followed up with a savage hammer fist to his downed opponent's face. Alistair later referred to the punch that left him unconscious as the uppercut from hell. And speaking of hell, Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald took an almost demonic appearance during their brutal rematch at UFC 189 in 2015. The two first faced off in 2013, but their initial bout couldn't hold a candle to their second encounter, which was later named Fight of the Year by Sherdog and MMA Fighting. Lawler, the welterweight champion, was defending his title for the first time, while Rory, hungry for the belt, was eager to avenge the loss he sustained the last time they fought. The bout began a little slowly, but in the second round, a kick thrown by Rory seemed to cause some damage to Lawler. And from then on, the fight turned to all-out carnage. The two fighters focused on each other's faces, landing devastating combinations that sent blood flying all over the place. By the third round, they were both dripping blood onto the canvas. And at the end of the fourth, with both of their faces practically disfigured, Rory's nose shattered, Lawler's lips split open, and both looked like bloodied zombies. They opted to stand and face off before being dragged back to their corners by their coaches. Eventually, the shattered nose proved to be too much for Rory, and in round 5, Robbie landed a shot square on his nose. Rory fell back, and the fight was stopped. Though Lawler did win by TKO and remained the welterweight champion, both fighters won the hearts and minds of fans in this brutal slugfest, which left the octagon floor spattered with blood. For more than 20 years, the UFC has been home to some of the most savage and skilled fighters the world has ever seen. And when those fighters clash, you can bet on seeing some brutal action. So from ferocious beatdowns that left fans cringing and calling out the ref, to interim title bouts that tested the hearts of future champions, those were the most brutal fights in UFC history.